Welcome back. We're touring modernism, right? Now, we were talking about those social utopic artists doing their thing, that is Kadenze, Mondrian, Malevich, and Tatlin. You know, they had this modernist optimism about changing the world through abstract art. Now we're going to switch to Dada and then Surrealism. And this is pretty wild. These movements evolved in Europe during and after World War I, and they represent the other side of the coin. They were anti-utopic. They were all about the irrational, the irreverent, the absurd, and then for Surrealism, dreams and the subconscious. So we're going to start with Dada. Now, some of the Dadaists carry over into Surrealism. Max Ernst, for example, does both, but we'll begin with Dada. So Dada is an art of impertinence. It's very naughty. And I'm showing you Marcel Duchamp's L'Oeil from 1919. He's appropriating Leonardo da Vinci. Now I want you to remember that word, appropriating. He's taking the famous image of Mona Lisa. So he's not really creating anything, he's borrowing a famous image. This is appropriation, and that's an art term we're going to use plenty when we get to postmodernism. So don't forget appropriation. Duchamp appropriates or borrows the Da Vinci, and then in good Dada fashion, he adds a mustache and a goatee. He draws in a mustache and a goatee. Very rude, Marcel, very rude to the history of high art, and that's the point. So his funny gender-bending play about sexuality will be a key theme in Dada and again in Surrealism. Now for Surrealism, this is because Sigmund Freud gets into the mix, and his writings about sexuality are read by the Surrealists. The pleasure principle, this sexual desire, is a guidebook for the Surrealists. More on that later. The title of the Duchamp, when pronounced in French, they're letters, but when pronounced in French, L'Oeil loosely translates as she has a hot ass. Again, classic Dada, very cheeky. So while Kadenze and Mondrian hope to entrance the people, the bourgeoisie, through transcendental pictures, basically, the Dadaists wish to subvert middle-class values. It was a kind of nihilism. Nihilism is a philosophy that sees the denial of the existence of any basis for knowledge and truth. So the idea for the Dadaists was to tear down what they saw as these false beliefs and build a life better accommodated to the irrational. And to get there, the Dadaists made provocative art, a lot of anti-fine art, against beauty, against craft. They used improvisation, they used spontaneous gesture, chance techniques, the accident, performance art, everyday objects, common materials, all of this is art, to challenge the idea of skill and craft. So here's Max Ernst, another Dadaist, his Marceline and Marie from 1929-30 in the Art Institute collection. Again, he has appropriated, there's that word, found Victorian steel engravings. He's cut them up, these engravings, and collaged them back together again in bizarre combinations. So check this out closely. There are those figures in the lower right foreground, the man wielding a knife against the woman. And then behind the figures is this modern feat of engineering. But of course, hanging from a crane is a giant phallic snake all the way at the left of the composition. Weird, 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 right? He's a Dadaist. He's attacking Victorian decorum. Very Dada thing to do, to subvert this Victorian imagery. And actually, that's quite a postmodern technique in terms of using the medium to criticize that medium. So he's using the Victorian engraving to criticize the Victorian engraving. More on that later when we get to postmodernism. Marceline and Marie is from a collage novel Ernst made about an innocent Catholic girl beset with erotic temptations. And of course, this results in her split personality of Marceline Marie, the title of the piece. So the work is a play on sexuality, the church, and industry. Here's another Max Ernst, his Pius XI, Baldness Awaits You, My Child. Odd title, strange title. Again, a nonsensical juxtaposition of images that coalesce into a parody of the church and of the state. Now, such naughty parodies and irreverent gestures really continue into contemporary art. For Dada and Surrealism's themes and strategies are still very much in play. And I want to show you just one example. This is Paul McCarthy's piece entitled Complex Pile, a feces-inspired art object which mocks the tradition of public sculpture, not to mention ideas about so-called artistic creations. Very Dada. It was an inflatable. He's this wild Los Angeles artist, very Dada. Dada was essentially a reaction to the illogic atrocities of World War I. Unwilling to become involved in this war, a group of artists headed to neutral Switzerland, to Zurich, and they gathered there in the cafes where Dada was born. Dada then spread to Berlin, to Hanover, Cologne, Paris, and eventually to New York City. So Dada was a reaction to 19th century bourgeois rationalism, to industrialism and modernism, which the Dadaists saw as leading to the war, as leading to justifying the killing of millions of people. This made no sense to these young Dada artists. One of the ringleaders, Tristan Tzara in Zurich, said, quote, "The beginnings of Dada were not the beginnings of art, but of disgust." Disgust with everything, from morality to Christianity to politics, even to art. So like the futurists, the idea was to shock the bourgeoisie, épater la bourgeoisie. This became their rallying cry. And like the futurists, performance art was a major aspect of their expression. The intention was to stir things up, and it did. It was wild. It was Dada. Here's the Dadaist Hugo Ball, dressed in a kind of cylindrical pillar of shiny blue cardboard, so that he really couldn't move. He was carried onto the platform where he recited a kind of sound poem. In Paris, another performance by a Dadaist, Jacques Vacher, who dressed like a soldier, walked into a theater lobby at intermission and started firing blanks. His point was, how was his act any more absurd than young men as soldiers killing other young men during World War I? World War I is the context. Or then the painter in New York who called herself Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven, who donned outlandish costumes, once shaving her scalp and painting it purple, another time affixing a battery-operated taillight to the rear of one of her dresses. Very nice. Duchamp, along with fellow artist Man Ray, actually produced a film with the Baroness in which the entire action consisted of her shaving off her pubic hair. Need I say more about Dada? Anyway, back to the chronology. So early in February 1916, Hugo Ball, who we just saw in his groovy costume, he's a German poet and philosopher taking refuge from the war in Switzerland, and he founds the Cabaret Voltaire, this club, this bar in a slightly wild quarter of Zurich. It was a cross between a nightclub and an art society where young artists and poets were invited to read their poems aloud, hang their pictures, sing, dance, party, play music. It was a happening spot in Zurich. And I'm going to play for you a sound piece by the artist Kurt Schwitters, who didn't perform there, but he too was a Dadaist, and the work, I think, is very related to what the artist would have been experiencing in Zurich. Now here's a sculpture by another Dadaist, Raoul Haussmann, entitled The Mechanical Head from 1921. It's a crazy assemblage of found objects, many of which are measuring devices, as if this Dadaist is challenging our belief in progress through logic. The Dadaist Holzenbeck said, quote, "We were agreed that the war had been contrived by the various governments for the most autocratic, sordid, and materialistic reasons. The Dadaist fights against the death throes and death drunkenness of his time. He knows that this world of systems has gone to pieces and that the age which demanded cash has organized a bargain sale of godless philosophies." So he and Haussmann were German Dadaists, but everybody is reacting to World War I. Jean Arp, another Dadaist in Zurich, whose work Manicure Relief is in the Art Institute of Chicago, it's from 1930, and you're taking a look at it right now, said, quote, "In Zurich in 1915, losing interest in the slaughterhouses of the World War, we turned to the fine arts. While the thunder of the batteries rumbled in the distance, we pasted, we recited, we versified, we sang with all our soul. We searched for an elementary art that would, we thought, save mankind from the madness of these times." Now, Arp had studied in Paris. He knew the avant-garde. Then he escapes to Switzerland during the war. He's a Dadaist. He's embracing chance techniques, often cutting out forms and then letting them drop to find his compositions. He also challenged traditional artistic media, like a good Dadaist, using paper collage and making this machine-sawn wood relief that exists somewhere between the disciplines of painting and sculpture. He very deliberately avoided oil painting, which to him seemed weighted down by the tradition. And with his wife, Sophie Tauber Arp, he made collages and embroideries based on simple geometric shapes. It was a kind of simplification a la Mondrian, but also very much a playfulness out of Dada. This work, made of curvilinear organic shapes, explores a new abstract biomorphic language that he will share with Juan Miró, André Masson, and other artists associated with Surrealism. More on biomorphism shortly. Arp said, quote, "Dada is for the senseless, which does not mean nonsense. Dada is senseless like nature. Dada is for nature and against art. Dada is direct like nature. Dada is for infinite sense and definite means," end of quote. Interestingly, Arp also did automatic writing or accidental poetry, which was made by cutting out individual words from a newspaper, throwing them in a bag, shaking it all up, and then recording the order of the words as they were taken out of the bag. Try this at home. So both Dada and Surrealism has a whole literary component to these two movements.